Here we begin our first foray into kind of traditional programming using Matlab. And we start with conditional statements. While we're talking about the programming part of Matlab, I should say that it's similar to most other languages in kind of the concepts we're going to be using. Conditional statements, a little bit later we're going to get into using loops, and that's common to most programming languages. Now, the way I'm going to present programming in Matlab, for the most part, is going to be structured programming, as opposed to some other languages like C++ or Java, where we can use object-oriented programming. Basically, the difference is in structured programming, it's going to work from the top of the program down to the bottom, kind of command by command as we're doing it. In object-oriented programming, it does it a little bit differently, but we're not going to worry about that for this class. When we were writing our scripts previously, what we saw happening was it started at the top of the script and worked line by line down, running every line that wasn't commented until it reached the end, and then our program stopped or it terminated. What we're going to be able to do first with conditional statements is kind of change the trajectory that our program takes depending on if certain conditions are met. And a conditional statement, what we're going to use is the if statement, the if or the elseif, and the else statement. So what this does is it only runs certain segments of code if certain aspects, certain parameters are met. So for example, I'm going to assign a value of 6 to x here. Now what I want to do is I want to display, so I'm going to say if x greater than 5, I want to display the value of x using this disp command. And otherwise, I want to display just a word. I'll say test2, just so we can see what the difference is. And else, it's going to display something else. Alright, so before I run this, let's just take a minute and see the structure of what I just wrote here. Alright, so let me clear everything at the top of my program. Alright, so on 23, I'm assigning a value of 6 to x, and then I'm going into this if branch down here. So what an if statement does, so we see these are all linked together. We start with a single if. We then can have an else if statement or multiple else if statements, and then we can have a single else statement, and then we must end the branch with this end command here. So all these statements are linked together. So basically in if statement, what we're doing is we're going to approach this first line and we see does this pass the first test. So basically what the lines look at is the statement true or is the statement false? So for example, if I assign a value of 6 to x, is x greater than 5? Well, we know from previously the logical tests that that's false, that is going to be true. X is greater than 5. So this statement is true, which means that when a statement is true, it's going to go and it's going to run the things inside that statement. So for example here, it's going to display the value of x. And that's the only thing inside that first kind of branch here. While we're in an if statement, once we go down one branch and then complete all the tasks in that branch, it doesn't do or test any of the other branches in my if statement. So for example here, it's going to display the value of x, it then skips over these other tests and these other statements, and then it's going to terminate my program. So in this case, it will not display test 2, it will not display failure. So if I run this segment, all it did was display the value 6. However, if I change the value of x, let's say I change it to 3, let's see what's going to happen in our program. All right, so again, we assign the value of 3 to x. We're going to come to this first branch of our if statement. We're going to test, is x greater than 5? In this case, it's false. Oops, let me assign that value. In this case, it's false. Because x is not greater than 5, this statement inside here, the display x, will not be run. So we skip over this first if statement and we're going to try the next test. So we're going to go to this else if branch. And what we do here is we make a second test. In this case, is x less than 10? Well, 3 is less than 10, so that's going to evaluate to 1. So it came to the second line here. That was true, which means it does go down, in this case, that second branch. So it's going to display the text test2 and then exit that if statement. So again, if I run this, it displays test2 and then it stops. Right, and then finally here, I want to see I can reassign the value of x. I'm also going to change my second test here just to see how it functions. So in this case, I'm going to stick with x equals 3, but now I've changed that else if statement. So let's again see what happens as we're going to go through this program. It's going to do the first test. X is not less than 5, so it does not go down that branch. It goes to the second test. X is not greater than 10, so it does not go down that second branch. What the else statement does is it says if all the previous tests have failed, then run this section of code. Now again, having an else statement is optional. You don't necessarily have to go down any branch, and it will just keep going to whatever is happening after that if statement. So in this case, just to show you how it's running, I'll just have it display some text here. All right, so we know, looking at this, it's going to not pass the first test, not pass the second test, but then hits this else statement. And again, the else statement only runs if it failed every previous test in my if branch. So if I run this, it went down that third branch, the else statement, and then exited the if statement, and then displayed the text running. Let me go and change this back again. Let's change this to 6. Again, we expect it does pass that first test. So it's going to run the 6, exit the if statement, and then display the stuff that happens after the if branch. In this case, actually the way I've set up this if branch, we see that if x is greater than 5, it's going to run the first thing. It can never get to the second branch, the way that this is structured. And this is important to look at in if statements. If I make this 12, we see that if x is greater than 5, it does pass the first statement. However, it would also pass the second statement when I reassign this to 12. So it would pass the first statement and it would pass the second statement. But something to keep in mind for if statements is it goes down the branch of the first statement it finds to be true and then exits the if statement. So even though it would pass the first and the second, because it went down the first statement in this case, it then exits the if statement. It never has a chance to go into that else if. It exited after the first if statement. However, I can set this up a little bit differently. So let's just say for the purposes of this, I can add another else if. I can have as many else ifs as I want. But the last statement, if I'm going to use an else, the last one has to be the else. All right, so in this case, I have 3 tests that I'm performing. Is x equal to 5, is equal to 10, is equal to 13. If it's not equal to any of those, it runs the else statement. Right, so when I set equal to 5, it goes down that first branch and displays the value of x. If I make it 13, we expect it to go down not the first branch, not the second branch, but that third branch where it is true that x is equal to 13. So in this case, it went down that third branch, that second else if statement, displayed the text test3, and then the text running. And if I test that if statement again, let's make it 16, it won't pass the if, the first else if, or the second else if, so it will go into my else statement. Right, so in this case, it went into the else, it printed failure, and then exited the if loop, the if statement, and printed running. Like I said, it's optional to have else if statements. It's also optional to have the else statement, or kind of that catch-all. So I'm going to comment that out. So there is no else statement anymore. So it either is the first, the second, or the third, or it's just going to exit the if statement. So if I run this snippet now without the else statement, it didn't go down any of the branches. It just exited the if statement and it printed the word running. And just to generalize this a little bit more, let me uncomment this. This is a very simple demonstration, but you can have multiple pieces in your if statement. So I can say that if it goes down the first branch, that's going to display the value of x. It's then going to add 5 to my value of x also. So it's going to do two things. So let me rerun this. So it printed the current value of x. It then added 5 to my value of x. So now we see x was originally 5. X is now 10 because it went down that first branch. So I can add these extra commands in here that are going to actually modify the value of x that I'm using. So again, just to see how this works, if I assign 10 to x, it goes down that first else if statement. So it displayed test 2. It also changed my value of x. It's now 8 because it's x minus 2. And finally, if I come here, if I assign it 16, it went down the else statement because it didn't pass any of these 3 tests. So it printed failure, and now if I look at my value of x, it took x and it reassigned it 2 times x. So x is now 32 after going through that else statement.